In today's webinar, Top Domain Management Strategies for 2017, we'll be discussing key domain management trends of 2016 and the top domain management strategies for 2017. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We're joined by domain management experts Alison Simpson and Kiran Malancharuvil. Alison is a Senior Product Marketing Manager of Domain Management at MarkMonitor. With over 11 years of experience in the domain name industry, Alison has worked closely with several Fortune 1000 companies and has managed a team of client services managers that provide support to MarkMonitor customers. Alison has managed all aspects of corporate domain management, including domain registration and maintenance, new TLD strategy consultation, and continues to work with many of MarkMonitor's Fortune 100 companies to provide industry insight and domain protection strategies. Kiran is the Policy Counselor for MarkMonitor, responsible for monitoring the legal, legislative, political, and regulatory environment around brand ownership. She represents the interests of MarkMonitor clients at ICANN through the Intellectual Property Constituency, at INTA as a member of the Internet Committee, and at IACC as a member of the Internet Task Force. Kiran has taken a leading role defending brand and consumer interests on policy and advocacy issues related to the new TLD program, Registrar accountability, accessibility of website ownership data, and consumer fraud. She's a trademark attorney with experience in international and domestic trademark prosecution, litigation, anti-counterfeiting efforts, and brand protection counseling. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Alison to get us started.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you everyone for joining Kiran and I today. Before we get into the top strategies for 2017, I'd like to take a quick look back at the key domain management trends of 2016, including all the launches, the evolving security threats, the latest on new TLDs. We'll talk about registry registrar consolidation and acquisitions, and then Kiran will cover the many ICANN initiatives that occurred throughout the year. Then we'll talk about some domain management strategies for 2017. Oh, and I should also say, to reiterate what Gina had said at the beginning, that if you do have any questions, please use the question and answer box, and Kiran and I will do our best to address your questions at the end of our session. So let's take a look at some of the key domain management trends of 2016. As far as what the domain market looks like, the first quarter of 2016 closed with a base of approximately 334.6 million domain names across all top-level domains. That represents an increase of 38.2 million domains, or 12.9% year over year. CCTLDs totaled approximately 149.9 million registrations, which is an 8.5% increase year over year. And CCTLDs represent almost half of the domain registrations, so it's really important to consider those in your global domain strategies. The 10 largest CCTLDs worldwide, including China, Germany, United Kingdom, and Netherlands, account for 49% of all CCTLD registrations. Even though new TLD launches slowed down in 2016, there were plenty of other launches that kept brand owners busy. We saw a few second-level CCTLD launches, including .sb for the Solomon Islands and the relaunch of .th for Thailand. More CCTLD registries began offering 1- and 2-character premium domains like .ie and .sc. We're seeing more availability of IDNs. Now, IDNs, or international domain names, allow users to access domain names in their local language. And since more businesses recognize the importance of reaching out to international audience around the world, IDNs allow these brand owners to reach their customers in the localized language. And like I said earlier, even though new TLD launches slowed down in 2016, brand owners still needed to track new TLD launch dates and registry requirements. In 2015, there were about 120 new TLDs launched, and then 2016, that number decreased to a little more than 60 TLD launches. And then finally, there were several registries that changed their registration requirements, many of them actually loosening restrictions. And when that happens, that can make the TLD more attractive to domain speculators or squatters. So it was really important for domain owners and brand owners to track those changes in requirements. Now let's take a look at some of the security threats that were targeting domain owners. So domain security threats continuously evolve and threaten brand owners, registrars, registries, and DNS providers. And while DDoS attacks are nothing new, we did see an increase in the frequency and the size of such attacks, especially towards the end of last year. We saw domain owners facing sophisticated phishing scams aimed at stealing valuable login credentials or their customer data. And there was an increase in domain hijacks at retail registrars, and some of those hijacked domains eventually being sold at auction sites. So any of these tactics, if successful, could be disastrous to a company's online presence, and there's not one particular industry that is a target. Every industry is a target. So let's talk about how these scammers attempt to trick domain owners. One way is through email scams. This is an example of an email sent to a domain owner that appears to be sent from their retail domain registrar. At first glance, the email appears to be legit. It's sent from their registrar. The domain owner is prompted to click on a link, which then can result in the download of a virus. So it could be that the emails vary in nature, all pretty much the same though, except from the registrar, that you have been reported to have abuse on your domain, or that you need to log in and change your login credentials. But always just, be very cautious when clicking on any types of link like that. This is another type of scam, again, appearing to be sent from the domain registrar to the domain account owner. The owner is prompted to click on a link to prevent the account from being locked. And then on this particular email scam, this is one that was sent around, November, December last year. It looks like it was an email sent from ICANN with some of their new transfer requirements. And ICANN takes these threats very seriously and takes steps to investigate these types of misuse. So always just be cautious when you're prompted to click on any types of links. Vulnerabilities can also occur at the registrar level. If an attacker gains access to a domain management account that is not protected with two-factor authentication, they can potentially update the WHOIS, the DNS, or transfer the domain out altogether. So this was an example of a domain that they didn't have two-factor authentication enabled, and someone was able to get into the account and transfer out their domain. Another example of that is a scammer that gained access to a very well-known sunglass company, and their domain, which generates millions of dollars annually, was actually hijacked and transferred to another registrar, and their site was redirected. In this particular example, the domain owner didn't renew their domain, and it got picked up by a third party. In this scenario, the website was listed on their product. Even when they no longer own the domain, they didn't get it back. They actually rebranded under a different domain. So it's just very important to make sure that your domains are set to auto-renew, that you make sure your WHOIS contacts are up to date, so that when those renewal notices are being sent out, that you're actually receiving them, and something like this, does not occur. Some registrars still fall victim to simple social engineering tricks. So make sure to partner with a registrar that has defined processes and procedures in place for managing login credentials and for managing corporate domain accounts. We're seeing a decrease in the number of registry breaches, but they are still a concern. Registries, this past year and the previous year, they've really taken significant measures to increase security on their systems. But the bottom line is have mitigation plans and preemptive security measures in place, such as two-factor authentication and registry locking, to help protect your critical domain assets should a successful attack occur. Okay, Kiran, I'm going to pass it to you, and then you can go ahead and talk about the many ICANN initiatives that occurred last year.
Thanks, Allison. Welcome, everybody. 2016 was a really big year for ICANN. We saw quite a number of big, sort of very well covered in the news things happen, and there are lots of opportunities for brands to get involved. 2016 was a big year. 2017 will be, I think, even bigger. So I'm going to quickly go through what happened with the IANA stewardship transition and how that was completed in 2016, talk about how we're reviewing the new GTLD program with an eye on subsequent rounds, and give you a little bit of an update on what happened with WHOIS, which obviously remains a challenge for brand owners, I think, and talk a little bit about what's going on in the ICANN world regarding abuse complaints. So 2016 saw the end of U.S. government oversight of the IANA function, or the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority function, which, of course, is the core function of ICANN as an organization. Unfortunately, I think because it was a little bit silly season with the election in 2016 here in the United States, the IANA transition really became political fodder, and it was really very, very often misunderstood, especially when mainstream media, many of whom don't have a lot of exposure into this sort of niche world of ICANN politics and policies, started trying to cover what the IANA transition really meant. The bottom line, though, is that the Internet is basically the same. ICANN has had the job of fostering the IANA function since 1999 when it was created, through an affirmation of commitments with the United States government. So the transition really didn't do anything as far as how the Internet is functioning. There are some implications about how decisions are made through ICANN and who may have, sort of the ultimate sort of carrot or stick to direct ICANN policies to be, respectful of the multi-stakeholder process, for example. So the transition is in keeping with the multi-stakeholder model of Internet governance. It basically took away any one person even having the appearance or optics of control. Not that I believe that the United States government ever sort of took that role or abused its role as the person who gave the IANA functions to ICANN. But now governments are one voice of many, and there's no sort of elevated importance of any one government or even governments as a whole. So we've got the generic name supporting organization, of which we are a member through the intellectual property constituency and the business constituency. You have the governments, you have the CCNSO, the country codes name supporting organization, you have the at-large advisory committee, you have the SSAC, the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, and we're all sort of now operating in an equal footing, which ultimately is a good thing, I think, for the way that the Internet is functioning. As far as ICANN being an accountable organization and sort of worthy of being its own sort of its own organization insofar as it evaluates itself and its own way of functioning. Those initiatives are ongoing. There were some that had to be completed before the transition, and then there are some that will be ongoing, including discussions about human rights and discussions about the role of governments, discussions about jurisdiction of ICANN, which is very, very important, especially if we're talking about further new GTLDs, et cetera. So keep an eye on that. That will continue to be a lot of discussion throughout the community. But that was kind of a really big thing in 2016, and the people that worked on it really should be congratulated for their hard work. There are 1,215 new GTLD strings delegated as of when I pulled these numbers last week. There's been 1,241 registry agreements signed with the new GTLD program. A lot of those are .brands, which have not necessarily launched. Some are generics. Most of you know and have been aware of those launches for the sake of registering brands in Sunrise, or even keeping an eye on things like land rush registration, trademark claims, et cetera. New GTLDs are already changing hands, so organizations that own certain extensions are already sort of selling to others. There are entire registries that managed entire portfolios of new GTLDs that have sold them. So it will be interesting to see how that affects the rights protection mechanisms that were put in place, the individual registry models. There are things like blocking at stake. So very important for brands to sort of keep an eye on that, just to make sure that what protection they have already established for themselves in GTLDs isn't changing as ownership of these new GTLDs might change moving forward. And of course, we'll keep an eye on that for you. There are new launches all the time and new business models. We saw some really unique business models in 2016. We saw the launch of .feedback, which was not without controversy for a lot of our clients. We saw a number of brand names registered with WHOIS information fraudulently populated with brand contact information. We also saw that the .feedback business model was that they populated a feedback platform to encourage sort of consumer speech. So that was sort of an interesting and new way to see that. And there are sort of more unique ways to capitalize on the new GTLD program that we see every day from those that invested in it. The defensive registration stats and studies are well underway. 71% of new GTLD registrations are parked, which indicates to some extent that those might be defensive registrations. We saw a lot of purchases of blocks. We saw a lot of, obviously as a corporate registrar, a lot of our clients were primarily registering for defensive purposes. And I think we'll see more stats and studies coming out in 2017 as the CCT, which is the Consumer Choice, Competition, and Trust Review Team, is exploring other ways to determine what's defensive and then to collect that data and disseminate it to the community, so we really know what the impact of the new GTLD program was. And brands who felt like the new GTLD program was sort of a boondoggle to them, insofar as you only had to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year on defensive registrations, should make sure that their voices are heard. So keep an eye on these stats and studies. I know that INTA currently has a study out, the International Trademark Association, about how brands registered or didn't in the Trademark Clearinghouse and in the new GTLD program generally. And so I will, we'll watch this space to see what is going on and what opportunities there are for brands to participate directly. I see a question that I'm just going to answer now from Nicole. Will MarkMonitor kick the CCT review to clients like myself? It's not a survey that can be kicked to clients at this point, but if in the context of the review there are surveys and there are requests for input that we get our hands on, and we are encouraging the CCT review to do surveys and studies, that can be kicked to clients and to brands and to the community generally. When those opportunities pop up, absolutely, we'll be kicking them. When we do our ICANN webinars, we'll call your attention to that, and then obviously that will get pushed out to your client service representatives, and they'll be able to contact you directly on participating in anything that's available to you. If you're already members of the International Trademark Association, and maybe even if you're not a member, on their homepage of INTA.org, there's already a survey up, and that will get kicked into the ICANN review process. So if you want to participate in a survey, please look for that one. So some of the concerns as we move towards new GTLD subsequent procedures, there are obviously a lot of brand concerns. Are we just going to end up continually defensively registering our names, and is this just going to be a constant exercise in sort of proactively defending our brand. There are also concerns about brands who want to have their own new GTLD. What is it going to take for us to prepare ourselves to apply? Like, what should we be concerned about? What questions should we be asking ourselves as brands to even make the decision about whether or not we should apply? All of those concerns are being floated and being discussed. And that was a huge source of conversation in 2016 and will definitely continue into this year. There are a lot of registrar concerns with subsequent procedures that we are participating in, sort of the technical side of stuff. Not my wheelhouse, but Alison is working on that. My colleague Janelle McAllister is working on the technical registrar concerns to make sure that the new GTLD program is safe and that we have the correct information and domain names are secure, et cetera. There's a lot of concern around geographic terms and two-character strings about whether or not the governments are going to continue to object to strings like .amazon and .patagonia and other strings that may have some sort of geographic influence or concern for some countries, but don't necessarily fall within the realm of geographic indications, which have more legal protection. Two-character strings are huge because of the likelihood of confusion with country codes. So the idea that people could be creating a market for third-level registrations, which are confusingly similar to country codes. And, of course, we've got the Rights Protection Mechanism review, within which is the Trademark Clearinghouse review, how people utilize Sunrise, how they felt about the claims service, how to improve the Uniform Rapid Suspension System, or the URS, and then eventually the RPM review will be addressing the UDRP. I think it's also important to note that the RPM review is a review to look at how the RPMs apply to all GTLDs, so not just the new GTLDs, but also the 22 legacy TLDs. And while certain things like Sunrise won't apply because those TLDs have long since launched, since the dawn of the Internet, other things like trademark claims, for example, or the URS, may apply, and so the discussion about the RPMs applying to GTLDs is all GTLDs, not just new GTLDs, which I think is actually really good information for brands to have. The timeline for the RPM review, I think we're actually doing all right on this. I would say we're not as far behind as we usually are at ICANN. It looks like we are we're currently in the TNCH now, and so it looks like maybe that first blue line, which is the second line that you see, needs to be shifted like one dot over, because we just sort of started that at ICANN 57, which was in Hyderabad. And we will still very much be discussing the Trademark Clearinghouse by ICANN 58, which is in March and is in Copenhagen. So it looks like we will probably be preparing and publishing a report a little bit later than October 2017, but certainly by the end of this year, I think, is the goal. And the group is sort of chugging right along, and we have some really fantastic leaders who are making sure that the work is being done in a timely manner. So the RPM review is moving right along, and you should be able to ask your customer service reps for more. So somebody's asking me not to use so many acronyms. So the TNCH is the Trademark Clearinghouse. The RPMs are the Rights Protection Mechanisms. The first dot on this slide, which is the TNPDD-RP, is the Post-Delegation Dispute Resolution Procedure. The main discussion about that was why no one's using it. So if you're not familiar with it, it's because no one's used it. So, all right, moving on. And the URS is the Uniform Rapid Suspension System. The UDRP is the Primary Domain Dispute Resolution Policy, which is the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy. Another big thing in 2016 was the movement on the Privacy Proxy Services Accreditation Implementation issues, or PPSAI. The final recommendations were approved by the Council way back in January, so a year ago, but they weren't approved by the ICANN board until August because there were some concerns from government, primarily from law enforcement, about how transparent that information was going to be to law enforcement that often have a lot of issues with needing to keep their investigations private. So for people who, for private groups like MarkMonitor, for brand owners that are trying to get the information behind a privacy shield, communication with the registrant is key to make sure that information isn't sort of unfairly or even unlawfully shared to a third party. Law enforcement doesn't necessarily want the website owner to know that they're investigating them. So there was a lot of like sort of remaining questions, and so the ICANN board didn't approve the final policies until August, and the governments are sort of continuing to participate in the implementation stage to make sure that those concerns are appropriately addressed. This is what's going to happen with this is what happened with the policy. We did scope and definitions. We have the requirements for data accuracy, mandatory provisions with customers, best practices, how to do standards with contactability and responsiveness so that it doesn't continue to go into, the ether, sort of, and we don't know whether or not they got it and ignored it or just didn't get the communication. That was really important for us. Relay and abuse report requirements was really important and a big win for us, and then disclosure framework with appropriate safeguards for privacy and data privacy laws. The implementation review team is working on now how to implement these policies in practice. The majority of the community members working on this are registrars. We are a member of this group. We have our technical team and then our policy implementation expert, Janelle McAllister, on this team. The goals of the review team, the implementation team, is to develop an accreditation policy and accreditation agreement, and then figure out how ICANN infrastructure is going to be built to process and manage the program. So the timeline is approval by 2008, effective at the beginning of 2019. So 2 years from now, this should be effective. Not great, but a lot better than sort of the last probably 10 years as we've been like sort of languishing behind privacy proxy, which is a real barrier to brand owners' enforcement, especially when you're dealing with abusive content. So WHOIS and registration directory services remain sort of a boon for brand owners. There is the Next Generation Registry Directory Services Policy Development Process Working Group that continues to meet. Our accomplishments so far with that group was to approve a work plan, to get sort of key input summaries, to figure out who the users of this data is, what the purpose of using the data is, what data elements are appropriate to share, which ones need to be private, which ones don't need to be collected at all, which ones need to be verified and validated. For example, the WHOIS accuracy program currently requires us to validate and verify address and email address, phone number and email address. And then, of course, there are lots of privacy concerns. And so there was a lot of literature that was brought forth to the group to help us understand what the data privacy laws are and what the concerns are to make sure that whatever policy we approve regarding WHOIS respects those legitimate privacy concerns while balancing the legitimate need and right to that information. So the next steps are we're deliberating on the volume of possible requirements. This group is extremely overwhelming. And I've been doing ICANN stuff for a long time. And even for me, it's extremely overwhelming. So if you want to follow this stuff and you're not really sure where to start, definitely reach out to us. We can help you sort of make sense of what's going on. It's very, very important, though. Some very basic questions, including whether or not brand owners have a right to access even the basic WHOIS information and website ownership data, is up for question. So that's sort of terrifying for anybody that understands how necessary the WHOIS information is for brand owners to be able to enforce their rights online. So it's important for brand owners to participate. I understand that it's difficult, so let us sort of help you walk through the process if you're interested in that. This slide that I just skipped over is just showing you what the charter questions are for the PDP on WHOIS. Nothing we haven't already sort of covered, but something for you to look at when you guys get this if you're interested further. Abuse is a major topic, abusive content. At ICANN 2016, that was sort of the big thing. We're talking about it in relation to WHOIS, RDS. There was a mitigation of abuse in GTLDs topic in Hyderabad. There was a domain name system and content regulation session in Hyderabad as well at ICANN, what was that, 57? And that was the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, was a panelist on that. They sort of arranged it. And the issues for consideration when we talk about abuse is, what are the responsibilities of the community members? Like, what should registrars do if they become aware of somebody using a website that they have under management for abuse? If anything, if their responsibilities are anything. What should registries do? What should ISPs do, et cetera? And there are some people that don't think that there's any responsibility. Some people think the website owner is solely responsible for the content, and that is certainly one point of view. The next big one is, what's the responsibility of ICANN? A lot of people feel like ICANN has no responsibility at all when it comes to content. Their mandate is solely related to just the domain name. I personally believe that that line isn't that bright, because things like the UDRP policy requires some content analysis to see if the domain name is being used abusively or whether it's fair use. But of course, that's not a simple question. So the discussions will continue in 2017. And a lot of people want to know if there's harm in developing abuse mitigation practices. Is it going to curb free speech? Is it going to chill speech on the internet? Is it going to destroy what the internet was really meant to be, which was, sort of information via anarchy? So we'll see what happens with these topics in 2017. I don't see this issue going anywhere. Lots of people are developing best practices, so not necessarily policies, but rather encouraging community members to take voluntary steps to be good partners with brand owners in the internet ecospace. And so that was it for ICANN 2016. That's it. that was a lot. So lots happening in 2017. We'll get to that later. And in the meantime, I'll pass it back to Alison to talk about the new GTLDs.
Oh, thanks, Kiran. Yeah, that was a lot going on last year for sure. And I'm not going to spend too much time on new GTLDs because I do think that you were very thorough with your review of the program. Just want to mention, that there are a little over 27 million total new GTLDs registered. The TLDs in the middle of the slide represent the top TLDs in terms of total registration numbers, and then the TLDs on the right are the most popular TLDs registered by corporations. Companies are still registering selectively, and many of the domains remain parked. These numbers are slightly different. This represents the 78% is actually of corporate registrations, where Kiran was referring to total registrations non-resolving or being live. So I'm hoping that next year we see so changes in these numbers, where I'd love to see more of the sites resolving, because if you're registering the domains, really let's put them to use, and I think you could do some really creative things if you are registering these TLDs instead of just parking them. So in terms of what we're seeing with behavior, registries are slowly starting to release their premium names list. This includes, but isn't limited to, 1 and 2 character domains. And it's likely to continue throughout 2017, with new GTLD registries focusing on selling more premium domains, especially to customers who plan on using the domain. I was at a domain event earlier this week and talked to several registries who were saying that they are selling these premium domains in hopes that the domain owners are actually going to use them, because that's what they want to do, is see that use increase. There's been an overall increase in the registry cost of domains registered in the sunrise period versus in general availability. Some registries and registrars offered deeply discounted promotional or blitz pricing in 2016, which many of that we saw the registrations in that particular TLD increase. We saw the introduction of new blocking service. We saw the DPML Plus, which covers premium domains as well as additional strings. So something a little different from past blocking services. And there was news surrounding questionable registry behaviors, as Kiran mentioned, that continue to grab headlines, including the filing of a PIC-DRP, which is a public interest commitment dispute resolution procedure. That was filed by major brand owners, including MarkMonitor. So as far as what .brands are doing, usage is still low, but we are starting to see more companies use their .brand TLDs. As of December 31st, 99% of .brands have been delegated, and we'll see more use this year, but I'm hoping, over the next several years, I think we'll really see a difference in that usage. Last year was a record year for domain disputes, and we also witnessed the largest URS decision to date, which is a Uniform Resolution Dispute, and that is part of the new GTLD program, the Rights Protection Mechanism, that was introduced as part of that program. The decision, the claim was filed by Ashley Furnitures, and it resulted in the suspension of 474 domain names, so that was a really big decision for them. And then lastly, one of the trends was the registry and registrar consolidation. So stories about company partnerships, acquisitions, consolidations, divestitures were steady throughout the year. Quite a few new GTLDs changed operational hands, as Kiran mentioned, and domain registrars were acquired by other registrars. And we saw website building platforms and other service providers expand their service into the domain reseller business. So now that we have a better understanding of the current environment, let's take a look at some strategies to help protect and enhance your portfolios in 2017. Now that we're almost through the first round of new GTLDs, brand owners should refocus their domain strategies by casting a critical eye on their current portfolio and take steps to build a portfolio with appropriate composition. So what does that mean? It means taking a closer look at domain holdings and really understanding what the coverage is. Are you registered in regions that you should be? Are you over-registered in a particular region or under-registered? Do you have gaps in your portfolio? It also means balancing brand protection efforts with defensive registrations. Did you not register your brand in a certain TLD only to enforce on the taken domain later? We know that many brand owners are experiencing launch fatigue. And budgets may have been allocated more towards enforcement efforts than registration efforts. And to some extent, that is the right strategy. But it's a real balancing act because in some cases, it may have been more cost-effective to defensively register a certain TLD and get that traffic to your main website. So there are more than 2,900 possible TLD extensions, and that's including second and third level CCTLDs, legacy GTLDs, sponsored TLDs, and new GTLDs. So with more than 2,900 TLD extensions available, companies really do have to be strategic with their registration decisions because not every company will qualify for each extension, nor would every extension make sense for your business. But it's important to partner with a registrar that can give you guidance on what and where to protect your brands. Where you register really depends on brand value and what your goal is. And the first critical step is to understand existing coverage. Once you understand existing coverage or possible gaps, revisit your corporate objectives for your trademarks and brands. Are you looking to maximize exposure on the internet? Are you registering for defensive purposes? That will help you determine how wide to cast that registration net, with fewer registrations for defensive strategies and then, wider registrations to maximize that exposure on the internet. If you are looking to build your portfolio or launch a new product or brand, there are many factors to consider. First is to involve all stakeholders. So that would be IT, marketing, legal. Make sure that everyone is involved in this process. Then, review what your corporate objective is, or what your corporate objective is. Again, is it for defensive purposes, or are you looking to maximize your exposure? And then be up to date on the current market trends. So what we did, earlier. Just is there a particular TLD that is experiencing more abuse than others? Is there a region that just launched a new particular TLD? So just keep up to date on the current marketing trends. With costs, what are your costs and what is your budget for the project? Have that before you go out and start registering so that you can have a clearly defined plans when you go and start registering your brand or product in these TLDs. And then when you are registering, know what you're going to list as your who is contacts. Use standard contacts whenever available. And then finally, identify what you're going to do with the domains. Where are they going to point? Make sure that when you are registering these domains that they're actually pointing to some type of live content. So I mentioned earlier how companies are recognizing the importance of reaching that international audience. So it's important to know where your customers are located and, to know whether or not you want to expand your presence in a new region. Really look for those opportunities across all TLDs. So creating a web presence in countries where CCTLDs dominate instead of using your .com. A DE in German may be more popular amongst Germans located within the country. And then look for those TLDs that help generate e-commerce revenue worldwide. Register in local languages to support your global promotion and to really portray that understanding of culture and nationalistic pride. And then, I know that new GTLDs has kind of been a pain, a thorn in the side for many brand owners, but they really do offer creative opportunities for memorable campaigns and launches. So once the launches slow down a little bit, taking a look at those to see if you can do anything creative, especially if you've already registered it, be an early adopter and do some creative things with those new GTLDs. We talked about 2016 being a record year for domain disputes. Do some of you spend more budget than anticipated on enforcement? Understanding TLD risk can help with registration decisions. If a certain TLD has a higher risk score, it may be more cost-effective to defensively register in order to save money later on down the road on enforcement costs. Risk is determined on a number of different factors, and we here at MarkMonitor, we can work with you to identify those high-risk TLDs that may be of concern to your brand. Leverage blocking where available to help save or maintain costs, and then override the blocking once you're ready to use the TLD. There are a few blocking options available, and again, we can help you determine if blocking is a good option for you and your brand. And then finally, keep those policing and enforcement programs intact, know when abuse is occurring, and take appropriate action when necessary. So what types of recovery methods are available? Depending on how critical the domain is, domain backordering may be a good option for you. It's a low-cost solution to recover domains once they expire, but success is not guaranteed. So if you are going to backorder with multiple providers so that increases your chance of successful registration upon deletion. And the blocking is available for GTLDs, and some CCTLDs do offer it as well. So domain acquisitions is often used for new product or brand launches, but it's also a good option when other recovery options are not practical. If you're going to acquire a domain, work with the third party to conceal your identity in order to prevent price escalation. And if you're unsure about whether or not an acquisition is the best recovery method, work with our team of experts. Have them evaluate the domain for you, and they'll give you their advice on what options are best for you. And those, it'll help you just make that informed decision. If you're looking at enforcement options, there are a few options available. So there's the cease and desist, and if you use MarkMonitor for your brand protection, this could be automated through the brand protection product. And again, with that, compliance is voluntary, so it's always a good first step. Then you have the URS, the Uniform Rapid Suspension, and then the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, the UDRP. So, you know, the URS is a lower cost than the UDRP, but it only suspends the domain. You can't transfer ownership over to you. So once the domain expires, it gets deleted, gets back into the general availability pool. So depending on how critical that domain is, will help drive that decision whether you do URS or UDRP. So brand owners should focus on domain utilization to maximize their portfolio values. We've been saying it for a year. Every domain should have a purpose. So, you know, use the domains in your portfolio and track the traffic. Are you getting more traffic from a particular region than you thought you were? Should you promote other brands and products in that region? If that's the case, if you are getting more traffic from a particular region? Are you not getting enough traffic? Should you promote the brand and IDNs or native characters or CCTLD instead? And knowing where your traffic is coming from, is it coming from search engines? Is it coming from organic traffic? You know, knowing that type of traffic you're getting and the volume involved provides important intelligence and is an indicator of value. It helps you with renewal decisions, with locking decisions. So it's really, you know, very important that you track the traffic, measure the traffic. Okay, so where do you begin? First, align your utilization with search optimization strategies. Leverage web forwarding. So, you know, just forwarding those misspellings to core sites or product pages, you know, CCTLDs to those native language pages. And if you do have any derogatory domains, you know, just put them to a feedback type site or a review site or, you know, just a blank page, but make sure it points somewhere. And then conduct regular reviews. So, you know, we say that too, that domains are assets and should be fully optimized. I absolutely believe that. And when you have an optimized portfolio, you can more effectively promote and protect your brands. This slide is a representation of reports and services that we provide to our clients, and then the benefits of the reports. So, you know, really looking at usage recommendations or doing a portfolio audit or domain value assessment. We help with domain guidelines and processes. These all help you promote and protect your brand. And if you're interested in any of those, please reach out to your client services manager and they can help you out with that. Get you in touch with the team here that can help with that. So, you know, now is the time to review your domain strategies and processes. Fresh year, let's look at, you know, what's going on with our portfolios. An annual review should be done to reevaluate your overall domain strategy. It should include looking at those domain name trends, domain name landscape, reviewing any business changes within your organization that might affect your strategies and processes, conducting an audit to identify any areas of noncompliance, so doing a reverse who-is to see if there's any rogue registrations out there that you should consolidate to your domain portfolio. And then update your strategy and processes to reflect major changes in the environment. And then also on the security front, now is a good time to review secondary user accounts and their level of access, identify any clients that maybe are no longer responsible for domain management and removing their access to your domain management or DNS account. That is critical, and this is a great time of year to do that. And speaking of security, DNS and security should always be a priority, and it is a priority and main focus for MarkMonitor. I anticipate this year that companies will be looking at a multi-vendor DNS approach for additional redundancy and resiliency, and you know, make sure you're going through and implementing the security best practices, locking your domains at the registrar or registry level, knowing who has access to your account, implementing two-factor authentication and IP access restrictions. Now is a good time to make sure that all the security best practices are in place. SSL certificates are an integral part of domain security. So centrally manage your domains and certificates, so you get that visibility into all your certs so that if one expires and a customer is going to your website, there's a expired cert, they most likely are not going to complete that transaction. So make sure your certs are all being tracked and you have visibility into those. And, if you do have a customer-facing website, if you are collecting valuable customer data or login credentials, you start implementing those certs. So when we talk about protecting your critical domain assets, there are many preemptive security measures that you can put in place to provide peace of mind. So some of the account security measures is two-factor authentication, IP access restrictions, where you're restricting that access to a certain IP range or an IP address. Two-factor authentication is where you have that extra security code or token every time you log in. The forced password updates, having someone reset their password every 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, works for your company. I did include single sign-on, and while it's not necessarily a preemptive security measure, with two-factor authentication, it certainly can be. And if you ever need to disable access quickly for a user or someone, gets let go, you can, do it internally on your system. Implement those the advanced lockings, the registrar lock, the registry lock, having that extra security at the registry level, and then also zone locks. If you have domains on MarkMonitor servers, you do have the option to lock those zones like you can with your domains so that only certain users can access those zone files, and also that erroneous changes aren't made accidentally by following that protocol before that zone is unlocked. So utilize those advanced locking mechanisms. And then also, some operational policies, don't ever share logins or passwords or even auth codes. Limit your account access and get those automated email notifications for any changes made to your account. Oh, good old new GTLDs again. So there are some really anticipated new GTLDs that have yet to launch, and dates and restrictions are still unclear, but they are certainly worth tracking. Brand owners should also take a look at those new GTLDs that can now resolve in China, extensions like .club, .vip, .xyz, and actually China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, or MIIT as it's known. They recently approved GMO registries.shop and radixes.site for sale and hosting in China. China is an important market, and it's also a big market for domain speculators. And now that domain owners can activate their domains in China, many believe that it will encourage more domain speculation. But you shouldn't only think of it that way. There may be a TLD that resonates with your customers in China. So I think it's worth taking another look at some of those TLDs, see if it makes sense for your business. Like I stated earlier, registry consolidations will most likely continue throughout 2017. And there's still lots of buzz around, next rounds of new GTLDs. So if you're interested, if you're thinking about applying for .brand in future rounds, it's really important to start engaging internal stakeholders and for you to really get involved and get your voices heard. Oh, with that, Kiran, I will actually pass the ball back over to you.
Great, awesome, thanks. So ICANN 2017, there's a lot going on. Policy work will dominate. Brands will have a lot of opportunity for influence on important issues. People want to look at getting involved through the intellectual property constituency, the business constituency. I'm the primary rep to the IP group. Alison is the primary rep for the business constituency. Janelle is representing us in the Domain Name Association and the Registrar stakeholder group. The International Trademark Association Internet Committee, as I mentioned before, has a lot going on, including an active survey. The brand registry group will be a fantastic opportunity for those brands to understand what they need to do and what they need to pay attention to in 2017 moving forward. And there are 3 public meetings in 2017. We have Copenhagen in March, we have Johannesburg, South Africa in June, and Abu Dhabi in October. So we will be at those meetings, as always. We'll be providing updates, and then any information that you need, you can contact your customer service rep. If you're already a client of MarkMonitor, you can email us at the email address at the end of this presentation and ask us any questions about ICANN and getting involved, and any of the issues you have with Whois and all sorts of things, and we can talk about the initiatives that are happening in 2017 to address these issues. So here are some of the links to get involved in the organizations that I spoke about.
Great, thanks Kiran, thanks Allison. We are going to take some questions. We are coming up on time, so for anyone that has to drop off, I totally understand. We are recording this, so you can always come back and hear the answers to these questions, but I'll pass it over to you, Allison, to go ahead and ask some of these questions and answer them.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Okay, so here's a question. What should a company be doing now? And actually, you may have already touched on this a bit, Kiran, but what should companies be doing now if they want to apply for their own TLD the next round?
So this is Kiran. I can take that question. There are a lot of things that you have to do to prepare. So obviously, there are the questions that you have to ask internally in your company about whether or not it's a good idea for you to own a .brand, what would it mean for your company to own a .brand, and those questions have been shared in the community through the brand registry group, of which we are partners with. We're not members yet, but we know what is being discussed, and we can share that information with you guys. I think that as far as preparing in the ICANN space, once you guys as a company have a list of what you need as a .brand and what you want to see as a .brand and what you need as an applicant to make a .brand work for you, the best thing to do is participate in the ICANN policy processes to make sure that the opportunities exist for brand owners to have things like their own registry agreement to take into account sort of the uniqueness of a closed new GTLD as a .brand. So there are lots of things going on. There are lots of organizations that are dealing with these issues, and the primary thing that I can say is to sort of get involved. So if you're thinking about that, we at MarkMonitor have a team that's dedicated to helping you work through the issues for .brands, and so it would be useful sort of for you guys to connect with that.
Great. I know that we're coming up on time, but there is a comment here. Defensive registrations to save enforcement costs equals caving into ICANN's new GTLD extortionate business model. And I apologize if it came out that way, I by no means think that you should be defensively registering every single TLD. What I meant by that is that there may be a TLD that is problematic, may be seen as free speech, may be difficult to get back, and you may be spending more down the road trying to recover that domain. If it is a low-cost TLD, it may, be something that your company wants to consider. But I in no way am encouraging you to go out there and defensively register every single new GTLD. So just wanted to make that clear.
All right, great. Thanks, Allison. Do you guys want to take a couple more questions?
I think there was a question about resources for fraudulent Whois information. What resources are available for brand owners if their information is in Whois information fraudulently? So a couple of things. If the Whois record has your brand information in it fraudulently and you are not the registrant of that domain name, so they're trying to make it appear as though you've registered that domain name and you do not have control over it, that has been coming up a lot lately. And so we want you to let your customer service rep know about that. If you're a client of MarkMonitor, let us know directly, and we can help talk you through the options about that, because some of those are associated with sort of larger schemes that we want to address at that macro level. But when you're looking at fraudulent Whois information generally, or even not contactable Whois information, so junk info when you're trying to contact the website owner, there is an ICANN tool that's available on the ICANN website. It's a Whois inaccuracy reporting tool, and it's run by ICANN Contractual Compliance. That group is actually really dedicated to trying to get WHOIS information accurate and accessible, and they will do their best within their sort of narrow remit to address the concerns you have. If they aren't addressing your concerns in a way that you feel is inadequate, there are escalation steps that we have developed internally that I've worked on with my colleagues from a policy perspective to sort of contact the other potentially responsible parties to see if we can get some of the WHOIS information sort of accurate and contactable. But if it's fraudulently registered under your name, that's sort of an additional problem. It can be reported to ICANN, and it should be, but there are some other bigger issues, so we definitely want to hear more specifically about what that's all about. Alison, do you want to take the questions from Matt Sullivan? Does MarkMonitor have a list of extensions that can be used in China? And does MarkMonitor offer the discussed traffic analytics to evaluate a domain's value? If not, are they good for your expensive resources? Alison, do you have any insight into those questions?
Yes, I do. So, unfortunately, I don't have necessarily a list of all extensions that could be used in China. It's really like where is the hosting located? Is the hosting from within China? Then the site could be live. But I can tell you the new GTLDs that are, and I'll follow up with you with your CSM and have them send you a list. And then as far as the traffic analytics to evaluate a domain's value, we do consider that when we're looking at scoring a domain portfolio. So that is something that we can talk with you about, and we'll follow up with you on that, Matt.
So we have another question. What is your strategy recommendation around IDNs and geo new GTLDs? Alison, I think you're probably our expert on strategy, so you want to take that one?
Sure.
You're a strategist.
Oh, geez. Actually, no, there's a whole team of those here. So, our recommendation generally is that if you do have customer there, if you have campaigns there, to work with your counterparts in that particular region to see how your brands are being used. If they are on billboards with IDNs or with those native characters, then it would probably make sense to register that domain in that native character. Or if you have a brick and mortar store, if you're have a fashion brand and you do shows in London or New York City, then maybe those new GTLDs, those geo new GTLDs would probably make sense for your brand. So, I don't think that they're for everybody, but I do think that if you're conducting business in a particular region, and then it may make sense.
Right. So the last question we have is, does the premium name pricing help to prevent cyber squatters from registering certain brand domains? I think Alison and I probably both have some insights. I'll just say that there hasn't been a lot of evidence about why people. Let me say, there hasn't been definitive evidence about why people may or may not be registering .brands. A lot of the brands that have their names on a premium pricing list, in my experience, and I sort of have some face time with clients, Alison has face time with others, so I would be curious if she's heard the same. They feel like the premium pricing schemes seem more directed towards getting the brand owners to pay more for their own name than actually preventing a cyber squatter. So I don't know if the fact that it's not registered means that a cyber squatter was discouraged from it, or that a brand owner refused to be strong-armed into paying that much for their own name. I honestly don't know what the definitive answer is on that, but I do think that premium pricing is something that needs to be discussed. It is teed up for discussion within the context of discussing sunrise periods and sunrise policies in the RPM review at ICANN. So we'll be watch this space. We'll be asking brand owners how they feel about premium pricing, and we'll be trying to get sort of better analytics and better data about whether or not cyber squatters, put in those names for inquiries and got a claims notice and maybe pulled out or whatever, and see if we can't see if it had a deterrent effect. Allison, what have you heard about premium pricing?
Yeah, I've heard pretty much the same thing that you have, that you know, they are feeling like they're almost being penalized and being, you know, having to pay more to register their brands. And I think it has a lot, that's a major contributor to this, you know, the fatigue that the brand owners are feeling with all these launches, that, oh, here's just another, you know, pricing scam for us. So I've been hearing the same thing, Kiran.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Allison and Kiran. Thanks for sharing those best practices today. I'd also like to thank everyone tuning in for your participation. We had a lot of great questions come in. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days. So you can be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.